Welcome to another great episode of Create.Learn.Implement podcast, aka CLI podcast with your host, myself, Coyetta. I hope you guys are having an amazing day today. The sun is shining, it is humid, and that's the type of weather I love as someone from the island. So no complaints here. On today's episode, we have former Liberal MP, best-selling author, international speaker, business consultant and coach, and PhD student at Queen's University for Neuroscience. Also, the creator of Maximize You app, Celina Caesar-Chavannes. Okay, we had an amazing conversation on the other side. Lots of information to unpack and go through, but stay tuned on the other side for Celina Caesar-Chavannes. Have you ever thought about starting your own podcast? When I was trying to get this podcast off the ground, I had a lot of questions, like how do I record an episode? How do I get my show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all the other places people like to listen? How do I make money from my podcast? The answer to every one of these questions is really simple. Anchor. Anchor is a one-stop shop for recording, hosting, and distributing your podcasts. Best of all, it's 100% free and ridiculously easy to use. And now Anchor can match you with great sponsors too, so you can get paid to podcast. So when I thought about starting a podcast, I had no idea how it worked. I don't know how I came across Anchor, but I did, and it was free and it was 100% easy to use. And I love to use it to connect to my audience. So if you've always wanted to start a podcast and make money doing it, go to anchor.fm/start to join me and the diverse community of podcasters already using Anchor. That's anchor.fm/start. I can't wait to hear your podcast. Have you ever wanted to start a business but didn't know where to start? I know the process can be really overwhelming because I embarked on this process over 15 years ago and had such anxiety trying to do this myself. I don't want you to suffer the same fate, so join me and let me help you confidently start and run your business with ease. Go to www.coyetta.com, or you can find me on Instagram at I am Coyetta and click the link in the bio. It's that easy. Join me. Let me help you start that business. Let me help you turn your idea into a business, and let me walk you through the entire process. No stress. See you there. Thank you so much, Celina Caesar-Chavannes, for being with us today. So let me dive into this lovely woman. Celina Caesar-Chavannes is a business consultant, coach, and international speaker. She currently serves as the senior advisor, EDI initiatives, and adjunct lecturer at Queen's University. And her new book, Can You Hear Me Now, published by Penguin Random House Canada, is currently available on Amazon Chapters, Audible, and your nearest bookstore. She was the former member of Parliament for Whitby, parliamentary secretary to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, and Parliamentary Secretary for International Development. During her term as a member of Parliament, Celina was awarded several distinctions, including a feature in the April 2018 edition of O, that's the Oprah Winfrey magazine, y'all, entitled, What Would You Stand Up For? And named Chatelaine Magazine Woman of the Year for 2019. She has a Bachelor of Science, MBA in Healthcare Management, and an Executive MBA for the Rotman School of Management. She can be found on social media. That's on all social media platforms at I am Celina CC. Okay. Celina, thank you so much for being here. Everyone, if you didn't know, we just had a little recording mishap, but we're back. We're back.
We're back. We just picked up where we left off like it didn't even happen. So we're okay.
Thank you so much. So dive a little bit more into your background for us and how you transitioned from entrepreneur to politician.
Yeah, so that was very interesting, very serendipitous, actually. I'd never been interested in politics throughout my entire life. I grew up wanting to be a neurosurgeon of all things. And so when I did my second MBA at Rotman, there was a politics component in that course. And I think once we allow ourselves to be open to what the universe has for us, we kind of take paths that we don't necessarily design for ourselves. So I wanted to take my company global, but I'm in this course. And at the time, I was co-chairing Canada's first national epidemiology study in neurological conditions, looking at scope, impact, health services for various brain conditions. And the professor said, if you're having a challenge in business, you could use your political capital to help you with that challenge. And the people that we were working with this national research study were really caregivers and people living with things like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, and understanding the challenges that they had navigating their lives. And so in December of 2013, I decided at that point, let me get some political capital in order to be able to help individuals who I'm trying to serve. And just like that, decided to run.
Perfect. I love the two worlds colliding, because it's like networking, right?
Right.
Yeah.
It's actually creating that opportunity and understanding how to follow it through and bring it to fruition.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, I know you are of a West Indian heritage, so tell me how your childhood shaped who you are today.
Oh my goodness. In my book, Can You Hear Me Now? I dedicate the book to my mother, and I say, the iron that sharpens me. We don't have the greatest relationship, but she wasn't the pillow that sharpened me or the feather that sharpened me. She was the iron. And in the book, I say that I feared her while she feared for me and treated me the way she thought the world would. And I think she really prepared me for a lot of the challenges and obstacles that I would face, not only as an entrepreneur working in the neurological space, but as in politics, and even where I am right now in my life, a really tough sort of mom who knew we were coming to Canada from a very small island of Grenada, coming here and saying, look, you're going to have to toughen up in order to survive in this climate, literally and figuratively.
Yeah. I think there's something special about a West Indian mom. They tend to be a little tougher, but they're doing it because they want the best for you, essentially.
For sure.
That preparation that you were talking about.
For sure.
Yeah. Now, I was talking to you a little bit earlier, and I told you that I remember distinctly when you were elected, and I was honestly very proud as a Black woman, and I felt seen through you. So that was amazing. You are the first Black woman elected to represent the riding in Whitby. How did that change your family dynamic and your social circles?
I would say it didn't really change the family dynamic. I've always, my partner, Dr. Vidal-Chavannes, he's always been very supportive of me deciding on a whim that I'm going to, start a business or run in federal politics. And he's always been that support. And when he decided, to do his PhD or to change careers, we kind of oscillate between the support that we lend to each other and our three children. So it really didn't change that much. I think for me, what really changed was going from someone who is very private in the private sector, running my business, sort of doing things in a private way, into a very public persona, someone who was not just going to be in government, but was to represent people, but to really talk about what mattered as I represented those people, and talking about mental health, talking about racism. And when you're talking about those things in a public setting, the support comes out, but also the trolls come out as well.
Do they ever? Yeah. For sure. Now, if we think of a politician as a recipe, can you tell me what the ingredients are for a good politician?
Oh my goodness. I would say that you first start with empathy.
Yes.
If you're going to represent people, you need to understand what it's like to walk a mile in their shoes. You have to know what it's like to not be able to pay your bills, to sacrifice for your family, not just your children, but your aging parents, or, to understand hardship. And I think empathy is number one. There has to be a certain degree of tenacity too, to be able to speak to issues. If
Yeah.
representation matters, we need to be speaking to what matters to the people that we represent. So you need to be bold and audacious and be able to do that. And then I think at the last bit that would be required is that tenacity, that ability to sort of stick with it, although I didn't. And I wouldn't say that I don't have tenacity. I still do advocacy, but that tenacity to stick with it.
Yeah.
Because if you are, one of the few or one of the onlys, like I was, the only Black woman elected in the 42nd Parliament, so the only Black woman there out of 338 people from 2015 to 2019,
Mhm.
it gets lonely. And if I had one thing that I wish I had added to my recipe, it would have been that tenacity, that ability to not just go the long haul, but go the long haul with the support of the village, connect into the village, and use them as a resource to be able to go further.
Absolutely. But it also does, expose you to a new world where you see new things, and, the ability to kind of move through those things in a way to make you unscathed. That's where the challenge is, right?
Well, yeah. And I think in that learning as well, I didn't know it for myself,
Yeah.
but the ability to be there and then be able to say, look, we need to do things a little bit differently. Here's what I learned. I
Yeah.
think that's the important part too, is that my learning doesn't stay with me. It's able to be shared with other people, and therefore they could go further.
Absolutely. I love that. Now, as a former MP, you advocated for people suffering with mental illness and was awarded the Champion of Mental Health Parliamentarian in May 2017 by the Canadian Alliance on Mental Illness and Mental Health. So,
Yeah.
given our situation, we are slowly moving out of COVID, but we're still kind of in it. Why did you decide to champion that cause?
Well, early on in my political career, and possibly before 2016, I was diagnosed with major depressive disorder and anxiety. And
Yeah.
then in early 2016, I had what was, what you'd classically term a nervous breakdown. And I just knew that there were people that were suffering. I knew that I had a lot of privilege, and I had a lot of power. I could, take time off work. I could get the help that I needed.
Yeah.
I don't have to worry about being paid if I take time off. And then I just thought about the number of people that worry about those things. And then I worried about the number of people who think it's still stigmatized to talk about mental illness. And I thought, again, if representation matters, I need to be talking about things that I know will matter to my constituents, and especially to people in communities of color and Black communities
Yeah.
that really stigmatize mental illness and don't understand it. And I really wanted people to understand that it was okay to not be okay when it relates to mental illness, but to
Mhm.
also get the help that they needed, and that was okay.
Yes. And I really love that, because you are a Black woman, and this is not something, first of all, that we discuss in the Black community, especially as Black women. We're regarded as strong, we can't fall, we can't fail. And, there are things that we are, that happens in our lives that we have to address. And this is one of them for some of our community members, right?
For sure. We've been told that we have to be twice as fast,
Yeah.
run twice as long, work twice as hard. And that's not a sustainable model. And
No.
this is no disrespect to people that do that every single day, but it does wear and tear on your physical, mental, and emotional well-being.
Yeah.
And if we're not at least taking the time to say, look, it's okay to spend that extra 5 minutes just, taking a breath. And it's okay to know that you're suffering, but you're not suffering alone. That I think is what community is about, what the village is about, what sisterhood is about.
Yeah.
And I felt a responsibility to know that I was going through a really hard time. I felt a responsibility to make sure that nobody else was going through it alone.
Absolutely. Now, in your new book, Can You Hear Me Now? You write, this is not your typical leadership book where the person is placed in a situation and miraculously comes out, comes up with the right response for the wicked problem. This is a story of me falling in love at last with who I am and finding my voice in the unlikeliest of places. So take me back to a time in Ottawa when you realized that you had pain in your past and that you had to address it. What was that like moment for you?
Yeah, well, let me just preface that a little bit to understand that in 2015, when I got elected to parliament, there was no dress code for women.
Yes.
And why was there no dress code for women? Because it was never designed for women to be there in the first place, let alone a Black woman to be there, let alone a Black woman who's going to speak up to be there. So I already knew that the rules that were written were not written with me in mind, right?
Yes.
That's a good place to start, because it's like, well, you're breaking the rules. Well, am I really? If the rules weren't written for me, I'm not breaking them.
You're making them.
I'm making them, exactly. So advocating for people, or for the repeal of mandatory minimums, for example, was easy for me to do because I knew that I was hurting communities. I knew what it felt like to feel like you are being judged by the worst mistake you've ever made. So I use that pain to advocate for people who often are Black and Brown and Indigenous people who overrepresented in our prison systems. How do I advocate for them? How do I let them know that I see them? How do I let people know who have, criminal records for cannabis? Cannabis is now legalized and they can't get a pardon without paying $650. That is very expensive. That is not just, and it's not fair. So I know the feeling of what it's like to have that pain. And so on those issues of racism that exists in our policy, it was very easy for me to advocate, but it was also very painful because we, as a government, I was told that we would look soft on crime. It wouldn't poll well. So they didn't want to keep to the promises that they told people that they were going to make in repealing mandatory minimums. Very recently, they reduced the fines for cannabis, for pardoning your cannabis possession, but those records should be expunged.
Especially now that it's legal.
Exactly. And so why are we still criminalizing or harming people when we know that these policies hurt them? And that for me was, it's wrong.
100%. As I said, if it's illegal, then it's kind of counterproductive to still have those systems in place.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. Now you are a high achiever for sure. How do we learn to acknowledge our traumas before they highlight themselves in our present day? Because sometimes, we're human. We have childhood traumas. We walk around, and then one day they just hit you, right? So how do we counteract that in our lives?
Oh my gosh. We have a lot of moments that trigger. Watching the news right now, seeing, Black and Brown students being, not just being victims of war, but being, victims of discrimination and racism and violence in a particular way. It's very triggering. And I think for those of us who have, very strong positions, have the power to speak up about those issues, we should do that. I actually just sent a letter to the dean at Queens, the dean of health sciences, saying that we need to do more. We can't just say that we're helping Ukrainian people. We could denounce war and denounce racism at the same time.
Absolutely.
We could support Ukrainian people and provide extra supports to Black and Brown people at the same time. It's not a zero-sum game. And the fact that we're making it a zero-sum game and the rest of the world is being silent about what is happening is wrong. And so I think that we have an opportunity right now to use those moments that are triggering for us to do good, to know what it feels like to be those individuals, and to say to the people we work for or work with that, no, you cannot just say it's enough to help Ukrainian people. you also have to help those that are being even more negatively impacted by this particular situation, whether it's war or climate change or a pandemic or any forms of social injustice. We need to use that pain for good.
How did you address racism in Parliament?
So that's chapter 10 of my book. So if people have read the book, they will see that in chapter 10. I did in chapter 10, I did what most people do when they experience racism. I internalized it.
Yeah.
I kept quiet. I put my head down. I just stayed silent. And in fact, when the book was published, I told the publisher, I need to tear out all of chapter 10. It's so embarrassing because I know what was happening to me, and yet I kept my head down. And then finally, I just said, forget it. Enough is enough. And I number one, I started publicly talking about what was happening to me, because I didn't want others who were coming after me to be surprised by the level of racism, sexism, discrimination that exists in that space.
Yes.
So I started putting it out on my social media platforms, not through mainstream media, because I knew that the medium is the message, and I didn't want them to distort my message as a warning. And then secondly, I started just to speak up about racism that exists, right?
Yes.
And in talking about racism in 2018 is different than talking about it in 2020, when it's fashionable to talk about racism now, or privilege now. When I was talking about it in 2018, I was being gaslit by my own party. I was ostracized. I was told that by media that I apparently see racism everywhere. I was called Canada's most racist MP for talking about it. And it was a very difficult time.
Yeah.
But again, you have to use those moments, irrespective of how difficult they are, to challenge and have that conversation. And we had an opportunity, I think, as a nation to be talking about racism in 2018, to show our mettle, to show our dedication to diversity and equity. And at that point, we chose not to, and it's disappointing.
Absolutely. As I said, I was watching your moves very closely at that time. And I wasn't happy with what I saw for my sister. So
no, it was very disappointing. And it was in 2018, that had been about 2 years of culminating sort of behavior. So, what we saw was happening externally, I'd been going through for 2 years internally.
Right.
Just that sort of silent sort of tokenism, racism that I was experiencing. And at some point, you just got to leave the table when love is no longer being served.
Absolutely. And it shows you that we're still not where we need to be. And that's the sad part about it.
For sure. Sure.
Now I'm gonna switch the topic. You have a new app, Maximizing You, which is an equity-based leadership development app designed to promote asynchronous learning of key diversity, equity, and inclusion concepts as related to leadership. So dive into that a little bit more. Why is Maximize You a game changer for women and girls?
Oh my goodness. So when I read, in 2015, McKinsey and Company did a report that said if women and girls were given the tools to reach their full potential, they could add $12 to $28 trillion to our global GDP. And at the time I thought, wow, like, how are women and girls going to get these tools? Like, I have 2 MBAs. Where are they going to get these tools that teach them these leadership competencies like networking and communication and things like that, but also do it through a lens of equity? So understanding equity components, understanding bias, understanding culture of organizations and how they play into whether diversity strategies work or not. And so I just decided, well, if I have all that information, why not create an app that allows women and girls to get access to that information? And so I created various versions of this app. It was a book and then an online portal, but now it's an app available on Google Play and the App Store that really integrates leadership competencies that were evaluated on sort of annually in our corporations, but ties them in with various equity components so that first of all, we could be, I mean, people that actually need it, people that have biases and power and privilege, that they could cross-reference whether or not their teams are understanding what biases are,
Yeah.
but also to women and girls and gender diverse folks of color. They also learn those skills through the lessons that I learned. Right. So it works both ways.
Yeah. This sounds like something that the corporate world needs.
Oh, most definitely. And in doing the app, it is in particular to help organizations understand or see the shift in their organizational culture. And
Mhm.
it provides a foundation for, implementing the accountability mechanisms that are needed for equity. So
Yeah.
oftentimes organizations will say, oh, I hired a new, director of diversity or chief diversity officer, but there's no real tangible way of measuring whether or not you have had impact
Yes.
across your organization with your diversity initiatives. And this tool is one way, employee by employee, because it's tied to their performance evaluations, to be able to see whether or not diversity actually is a priority within your organization.
Absolutely. Now, do you think this app would have changed your life if it existed when you were a child? Do you think it would have been something that sparked something for you?
Yes. So these are all the lessons that I learned the hard way.
Yeah.
Understanding your worth, knowing how to network properly. Usually we take, our business cards to our networking events, and we assume that people are going to call us back without actually having, important conversations with them. So I wish that these were the lessons that I had learned 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And so, when people ask me, what is the age range for the app? I say anyone between 18 and I'm 48, right? So anywhere between 18 to 48, because
Yeah.
we're also seeing people with the great resignation,
Yes.
pivoting their careers,
Yes.
wanting to learn these new skills around leadership and equity. And so I think it's something that I would have most definitely needed then, but I also still use right now.
Absolutely. Take me to lesson 3. Why did you name it mistake/hardship? I
You
love that,
brought it
by the
up.
way.
Because Ms. Take is the greatest teacher I never knew I actually had. And now when I know that I have her, she's one of the greatest teachers I've ever had. Um, we've never been taught what to do with our mistakes.
Yes.
We usually make them and then we're ashamed, or we feel guilt around them. And I say that, Ms. Take gives you those gifts of guilt and shame. But if you stick around long enough and ask her, like, what is the lesson that I'm supposed to learn from this mistake? She will also teach you that lesson. And then if you stick around a little bit longer, you could ask her, well, what is the flip side? Because we know that everything has an equal and opposite energy.
Yeah.
So if this mistake was so painful, what is the joy of this mistake? And if
Oh,
we flip it around and stick with Ms. Take long enough, she will tell you what the joy is as well. And oftentimes we don't stay long enough to learn, because people say, oh, once you make a mistake, you dust yourself off and you get back up on that horse. No, take a moment to understand how you made the mistake. Not your friends, not your colleagues, not your parents. How did you make the mistake?
yeah.
And how could you then use that mistake to create joy, not just to yourself, but those around you?
I love that. I do think you're right. We just kind of get back on the horse, but it's like you have to take the time to understand where the error occurred so you don't do that again, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But it's more than that. It's more than just not doing it again. It's
Yeah.
also seeing, like, when I think about my life and the painful moments that I've had, the
Yeah.
mistakes that I've made, it now is a driving force for my advocacy,
Yes.
because I know the pain of being left behind. I know what it feels like to feel like, you're going to be judged forever by, the one mistake that you've made in your life. I understand that feeling. And
Yeah.
so my empathy for those that painful situations drive my advocacy and my activism.
Absolutely. And you needed the pains to produce that, to
Yes.
Yeah.
Child.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, what lessons have you learned from politics that you're applying to your life right now that just sticks with you?
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh, this is such a great question. I would say I call politics one of the most painfully beautiful experiences that I've
Mm,
had.
yeah.
And I call it painful because of chapter 10, because of the racism and sexism that I experienced.
Yeah.
And it was actually one of the first times in my life that I experienced them so blatantly.
Yeah.
And so what I've left politics and done is not only created this app and written the book around those experiences,
Yes.
but I'm also enrolled in a PhD program in my doctoral studies in neuroscience,
Yeah.
looking at the intersection of equity and how it intersects with empathy, and really trying to understand that beauty and pain, right? So how could we increase empathy from a neurological perspective? What does that look like? And
Right.
how does increasing empathy impact our ability to be more equitable? And I think when we look at some of the research done by other scholars, like, Dr. Robert Livingston and others, that put empathy at the center of their models, I really wanted to understand what the brain does
Mhm.
when it is more empathetic. Are we going to see shifts in terms of how people of color, especially Black and Indigenous people, are treated in our systems if there is a more empathetic approach and the empathetic courage that is required to change those systems?
I love that. How do we put that into practice? How do we put that into policies?
See, well, that's what I'm studying. So I want to, I want to understand that.
Yeah.
But even when you think about it on a very practical level,
Mhm.
seeing people walking a mile in their shoes, taking a real understanding of people's struggles, allows you to have to reduce the cognitive dissonance that is sometimes at play when you know something is wrong, but
Mhm.
you're acting in a way that ignores it, right?
Right.
So that immense cognitive dissonance that says, inequity or treating people poorly is wrong, but I'm still going to do it because it benefits me somehow.
Yeah.
We need to reduce that. And I think in order to reduce that cognitive dissonance, there is an increase in empathy. So when we even think about political will to
Yeah.
repeal mandatory minimums, we know mandatory minimums are unconstitutional and
Yeah.
they're wrong, but yet they're still there. We haven't repealed them. What is that dissonance, and how do we reduce that? How do we create the empathetic courage to do that?
Mhm.
That is what I want to understand.
That's a great. I actually would love to hear what the answer is to this
Yeah.
because um, we need the change, and even with self-awareness, it's not enough to change
Right.
lives. Yeah.
Right. So what element particularly of
Yeah.
self-awareness
Yeah.
is required?
Yeah.
And is that related to bias? Is it related to certain factors that influence our life? What is it?
Yeah.
And I believe it's empathy, but then how do we then increase it? How
Mhm.
do we activate it? What do we do to ensure that it reduces that dissonance that's seemingly in place when it comes to equitable outcomes for people of color, and especially Black and Indigenous people?
I love it. I want to see the work continue. Thank you so much for your time. Tell me, Celina, how you wind down from a very busy day.
Oh, I connect with my family. We always have dinners together. We sit down, have dinner together, glass of champagne always. I celebrate every single day.
Yes.
There's always something in the day worth celebrating, and usually at the dinner table, we sit and we go around the table and we cheers to whatever thing happened that day that's worth celebrating. And yeah, it's about family, it's about connection, and it's about also just recognizing myself and self-love, self-joy. um yeah, just appreciating me sometimes, even most times actually.
Yeah. Well, you're right, because we don't take the time to appreciate ourselves. We just want to make sure our family's okay, and then we forget about ourselves. But I love that you include yourself in this too.
For sure, for sure.
Perfect. And you have a beautiful family, by the way. So
Oh, thank you.
you're more than welcome. We have come to the end. Thank you so much. Where can we find you? I know you were on all platforms at Celina ACC. Is there anywhere else, like an email or something like that?
Yeah, so all social media, TikTok, Twitter,
You're on
Instagram.
TikTok?
Yeah.
Okay.
At I am Celina CC, so IAMCELINACC, and then available through my website at celinacc.ca. So www.celinacc.ca.
Perfect. I love it. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. I appreciate you so much. I'm so glad that we got the chance to speak because, as I said, you're someone that um, I had a very keen awareness of when you got elected. So I'm so glad that we're here to get together. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and you be well. Thank you to your listeners as well.
You are welcome. Thank you again.
Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye. Thank you for tuning in to another great episode. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, as all these things help to keep the podcast alive. Take care. Until next time.